welcome to the Podish-Sortacast thing where we talk about whatever the heck we sort of want, essentially, on the blog network itself. And one thing that sort of consumed us on free thought blogs lately is transphobia. I mean, this has sort of been a perennial topic for that, especially since a lot of the people pushing it are religious folk and all that. So naturally, a blog that sort of skews skeptics, atheists would take an interest in that. But even some people in our own community seem to sort of be perpetuating the same lies and misunderstandings, done by them. So the idea is we would actually sort of get together and stand up for trans rights and talk about, both our support for it and also debunk some of the lies that have been propagated. Today we've actually got a bunch of people with us today. I'm going to get, let's see, William Brinkman, to introduce yourself first. Oh, you're muted right now, Brinkman.
Yeah, technical difficulties, but I'm here. William Brinkman. I do the Free Thought blog, the Bolingbrook Babbler blog, and I also publish urban fantasy novels.
Excellent. All right. I'll pick on Great American Satan next.
Great American Satan, freethoughtblogs.com/gas. And the only overtly trans feminine person in this particular conversation, apparently.
Gotcha. All right. And Christian Wagner.
Yeah, and we appreciate that, the Great American Satan, that you will participate, because it always seems like this hetero males talking about other people's suffering is always a dime a dozen. So, but yes, I'm Chris Wagner. I have pro science blog, and I've been involved in all these transphobic fight against the transphobic as long as I can remember, being on the internet and debating in the comment sections. So I even was part of the blog hiding around town comment section when she invented the turf terminology. So I've heard. So apparently the worst slur you could call somebody, I was there when that was invented as a peaceful way of trying to mitigate the differences.
Nice. Oh, man, that's a little bit of history right there. And finally, we've actually got Sarah, Dr. Sarah, coming in as well. Sarah, you mind giving yourself an introduction and pointing to your blog?
Hello, I'm Sarah, known as Dr. Sarah, from the Geeky Humanist blog on Free Thought blog. Sorry for being late. Dinner overran. I'm in the UK and we're on a time difference here. But I'm here now.
Excellent. Not even technical difficulties can stop you as well, too. All right. Well, shall we get into it? I mean, again,
maybe you should just give yourself a short introduction.
Sorry, give ourselves a what?
Give yourself a short introduction. You were nice enough to let us do it. Yeah.
Right. Name's H.J. Hornbeck. I'm basically the host at the moment right now. I blog on Reprobate Spreadsheet, and transgender issues has been a fairly strong part of it. I mean, part of the inspiration is also a blog post that I wrote on the topic as well, but I'll let everybody else sort of weigh in on that as well. I'm sort of trying to come up with something, with some way to sort of frame this discussion a lot. I figured maybe Dawkins's latest bullshit would be sort of the best way to go about it. I don't know how many of you actually had a look at Dawkins's article in full.
I have actually not, so this sounds well worth discussing. Dawkins, the big name, and has been known to put his foot very thoroughly into his mouth, so yeah, go for it.
Oh, cool.
Okay, I'm being given a link.
Indeed. You gotta be prepared for these things. Since I wrote like a bazillion words in response, so I'll definitely give other people the floor first to respond to it as well. And I mean, to Dawkins in general as well, too. This isn't the first time he's been transphobic, so, let's just spend a little bit of time talking about his transphobia and...
But it's not even the last time. As I said, he's just started a new podcast, and one of the latest episodes, the one from actually I think the 29th of July. I mean, just Yeah, the 29th of July was transphobic. It was trans when ideology meets reality. My conversation with Helen Joyce. I have not listened to it. I am not able to stand his voice for long enough to listen to a full podcast with him. But so it's not his. I'm sorry, it's not his latest. It's his close to latest. Puts it on it. So
Yeah, he's really jumped into it with both feet and sort of become, you know, the sort of chief transphobe amongst the atheo-skeptic crowd, which is bizarre. I don't know. Brinkman, Satan, Sarah, want to weigh in on it yet? Or I mean, Sarah's probably still browsing around and getting up to speed. So.
I will say it's funny because we've also seen others. I mean, Jack Coyne and other biologists have really weighed into it, and it's so weird because it's so obviously wrong from a biological stand view. The whole binary idea, and also what is gender exactly and what is sex exactly is unclear. And while they're willing to kind of accept the ambiguity in a lot of other cases, it seems like in this case they just are not willing to accept that that whatever they believe is the defining characteristic cannot be said to be binary for some reason. I really don't understand it.
I would also say that when we get into trying to use biological arguments to argue how we should behave towards one another and how we should treat one another, we're not on very strong ground, and history shows we're not on very strong ground. I mean, who remembers the whole, well, men have bigger brains than women debate? Who remembers the whole, well, two people of the same sex can't make a baby together, so clearly same-sex relationships are wrong debate? Well, in fact, that's still going on. Before that, there are all the people who tried to prove that skin color was somehow associated with intelligence level. And I mean, you know, do we need to know about someone's brain size before we decide what job they can do or whether to treat them with respect? Do we need to know whether they can produce offspring before we treat their partnership with respect? And do we need to know how your gametes compare in size with anyone else's gametes before we use whatever name and pronouns for you makes you comfortable?
The gamete thing in particular is so weird. To sort of get into an argument I meant to get into on the blog but did not. Like, one of his main arguments for why sex is binary is that essentially the other alternative is basically all gametes are the same size. And, you know, animals just produce the same size gametes and all that. He then argues that no. What happens is one organism will actually try and produce a smaller gamete, and that actually sort of leads to a runaway selection effect, where one part of the within the species actually goes towards smaller and smaller gametes. The other one goes towards larger and larger, and this is all due to, you know, the different costs and all that are involved. Well, how much does my body spend on producing sperm? Like, is this like a major metabolic cost for me? Like, you know, and same with the eggs. These are generally sort of manufactured in infancy. You sort of retain the number of eggs that you've got throughout your entire life as a human being, of course. What exactly is the major cost to these things here? He sort of puts up this, you know, this very intellectual theoretical argument and all that for the evolution of it, and it's sort of remained true. It sort of is true at the beginning. Like, if you're a very small, you know, multicellular organism of, say, you know, thousands or tens of thousands of cells in total, okay, fine. Manufacturing gametes can be kind of expensive. But it wasn't always that way. And there are still isotremes and all that who come forward and actually, you know, still retain, you know, isogametry. And he even acknowledges that within the article itself. So, I mean, what exactly is this basis for? Like, it's a cute little theoretical argument, but it doesn't really seem to have much basis in actual, like, fact or evidence.
I think I'll let you go.
Okay. I think Dawkins and the mainline skeptical atheist groups, our leaders have this bias against feminism and liberal thought or anything that's amorphous. And from what you're saying about the article and what I've glanced and what I've heard from other things, it just seems like Dawkins came to the conclusion it's bad, and now this is like a glorified rationalization of it. And maybe to some extent with Ophelia, as I know when I read her old books, it was actually there's reality, there's one right thing. And I think that thinking permeates to the skeptical movement. It's like science is a fact. It's like anything amorphous and confusing that reminds them of woo, or I shouldn't quite say that, but yeah, I think there's a definite within the skeptical community, definite sense of categorization combined with this feeling of superior to their knowledge of science, and then in this case, it results in transphobia, which has very harmful consequences.
Yeah.
I'd agree with that. It's there's what almost. I mean, I said this. We were talking about this recently. That is like is there what purpose does debate serve? Almost like there's like your foregone conclusions and your rationalizations for it. The partisans are the partisans, and that's how it is. And it's like it literally, if being pro-trans rights was the conservative position, Richard Dawkins would be trans rights in 2 minutes. They're just it's just cultural warfare and doesn't really have any kind of real reasoning behind it. Brinkman also like mentioned that anything that's got there's this idea that there's what's real and there's what isn't, that's like the core of atheist and skeptic thought. And yeah, I mean, I used to think like that when I was 16. But it's yeah, I mean, the first, actually, when I was 16 was when I first came around to agnosticism, which is that realizing that every basis we have for knowledge is fallible, so claims of any kind of certainty are asinine. And so it kind of like shook me up. I was like, oh, just like ended up identifying as an agnostic for a really long time instead of an atheist. And it's because, yeah, that whole I mean, like anything that we think that we can be confident of, there should be room for some kind of doubt. And the like hardline biologist, like atheist, skeptic type traditional position was that like there is absolute knowledge that you can have, and like admitting any kind of room for doubt is heresy.
I think it's also worth remembering that a lot of these people now are. I'm talking in the atheist sphere, not in the feminist sphere, but in the atheist sphere. A lot of the transphobe now are actually also those who used to be Islamic bigots. Not like they're really doing some. A lot of the rhetorics about Islam and Muslims were really nasty, and they would consider it a war between the kind of cultures as well. So maybe these are the type of people who kind of have a natural tendency to try to have some kind of group to demonize. I know that's certainly true for the right wing Americans. We see a lot, but I also think that might be actually the case with a lot of these transphobic atheists. I mean, Ophelia Benton was a horrible he's a horrible transphobe, but he started out as a horrible Islamophobe before that, who was a bigot about. And again, there's a lot of stuff to criticize about Islam. I'm not going to defend Islam, but it's kind of the demonization of Muslims as a whole is kind of silly when we're talking about 1.5 billion people. You can't really just say that they're all evil and primitive and whatever you want to.
Yeah, it brings up something I've mentioned in the past, and that bigotry sort of tends to flock together. The things you sort of need to lies, thought patterns, logical fallacies you need to promote one style of bigotry tend to sort of feed over and help justify other ones, which is why you find a lot of cross-contamination. It's no accident you find a lot of anti-Semitism within transphobic circles. It's because a lot of the ways to sort of justify things go the same. Like Helen Joyce was promoting the idea that there's sort of this, grand like empire or something led by transgender people to actually conquer and take over, medical science or some bullshit like that. And she pointed to a lot of Jewish billionaires as being behind the scenes, most notably George Soros, which she explicitly names out. And this is a pattern that I've talked about in the past, especially when it comes to like sexual assault and all that. There is this sort of general, crank magnetism of a sort when it comes to bigotry. And unfortunately, this also occurs with transphobia too. It's all just sort of one mess. Unless you actually sort of sit down and pull apart what exactly you're saying and thinking about, it can very easy to fall into this.
And like one really sad aspect of that is that like I mean, even people that totally hate each other will come together to agree to hate trans people. It's like this fundamentalist Muslims and fundamentalist Christians and hardline atheists will come together to agree to hate trans people and then immediately go back to like hating on each other. It's like the various Untermenschen that have joined neo-Nazi movements because they're like oh, I think I'm better than black people even though I'm Filipino, and like these my white friends that just as soon see me dead, but like oh yeah, as long as I can oppress somebody, I'm cool with being here. Like house slave mentality. I don't really like Ben Shapiro, rubbing elbows with people that want to see the Holocaust part two. It's like, what the fuck are you doing, Holmes? Sorry. Anyway.
Yeah, and this sort of thing can lead it to evolve in various ways. Like there's the whole pastel QAnon thing, where what we normally sort of associate with far right people and all that actually sort of infiltrated the wellness space. Because a lot of the sort of pseudoscience that these people sort of propagate actually uses the same basic pattern, and so the QAnon people are able to jump in. It's another example of how these things can cross-contaminate.
One thing I thought was kind of funny it was almost heartening. Was it like Ron DeSantis' recent his entire political platform is like transphobia basically, and he's not doing well. And then when people look back at what his success in Florida when he got that landslide victory, it really looked like in retrospect it was more about the anti-masking than it was about about being COVID conspiracy bullshit than it was about transphobia. So at least that suggests that maybe Florida, while they are extremely dangerous whack jobs, they aren't necessarily genocidal whack jobs.
I wouldn't.
You're setting the bar pretty low these days, I feel.
And I mean, I did argue in a blog post that many of these people actually are promoting genocide against transgender people. This is something I only sort of came to in the past couple of weeks, but yeah, I mean, this is straight up genocide being practiced against transgender people. I've sat down, I've considered the arguments, and I gotta agree. It is straight up.
I agree too. And I'd say the US, what we're seeing is due to gerrymandering, especially in Florida and DeSantis taking over everything, it's like the Republican hard right is empowered and they don't feel answerable to the voters. So they're going wild on this. So I don't really have the statistics, but I don't think the general US public is as nasty as Ron DeSantis is, but the Republicans now can't, in many states, are unaccountable.
The problem is it moves a little bit when there's the whole overton window. You kind of move the debate, but it is true that this is I mean, that's the kind of the weird thing is this the transphobia comes from several different places. I mean, there's the whole weirdly feminist sphere of Rowling and that crowd of people. That's a pretty UK. That's a mostly UK thing, I would say. But I mean, I see it in Denmark as well. But then you have the whole politics. I mean, that's the U.S. way where it's a right-wing vet issue where they're trying to use it to get in and get some kind of cultural war starting. They tried that in Denmark as well. They created a new organization for gay and lesbian people that was exclusive of trans people. Somebody, me, looked into who created that organization and found out it was the right-wing politician. So, and I was lucky. I mean, there was somebody who I thought was suggested looking into it, and I did. So that had luckily been a little bit effective of kind of showing people that these are not neutral people parties in the thing. But it's so weird. I mean, and in England, you're now seeing both the far right and this weird feminist anti-trans. I mean, the TERFs kind of forming together and really doing some horrendous damage to young people.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Well, especially denying medical care and all that. I mean, like, it's tough to. People like to say, well, you know, the science isn't quite in. The science isn't quite in on transgender people. To an extent, that's not true anymore. Like I was in one article, I was able to actually link to like 20 different studies on gender affirming care, and show that the consensus is it works and it works extremely well. Like one study actually showed that not only do transgender people become less suicidal when given gender affirming care, they actually become less suicidal than the general public. Like it is that much of a benefit to them. And one statistic which often comes up is sort of regret rate when it comes to this sort of thing, with some weird statistics of like, oh, there's an 80% regret rate and blah blah blah. Actually, the actual number when you look into it is actually more around 1%, sometimes even less, which is remarkable because if you look at the rejection rate for general surgeries, the best ones are about 10%, with many of them actually being higher. Like knee surgery has a much higher regret rate by about an order of magnitude than gender affirming surgeries or care.
What's funny is breast reductions and top breast removal, like type top surgery, even for cisgender people, has the just practically nothing regret rate. So like cisgender women who are all like, I want less or no kind of breast, have like no regrets about it for the most part. So that's like one of the things people always point to as the nightmare scenario of like, oh, what if I made a rash decision and altered my body in an irreversible way, and then I wasn't. They like projecting themselves into that circumstance? But it's all like, if somebody wanted it enough to pursue it, the idea, the odds of them like getting those kind of regrets is like, it's ridiculous to try to project yourself into that scenario, because if it's not you.
I find the people who are there is a very high correlation between the people who are so focused on this idea of, oh no, what if someone has gender affirming care and regrets it, and the people who are pushing people into having more children. And again, if you look at the regret rate among people who have children, I don't know the figures offhand, but they are definitely higher than the figures that I've looked at them, and they're definitely higher than the figures of regret you have for people choosing hormonal treatment or surgical treatment for gender affirming care. And it just seems like if we're so obsessed with the idea that people should not do anything they might regret, shouldn't we focus on people's decision to create new human beings for whom they will be responsible for the next almost 2 decades? But no, apparently that's all. Oh yes, have children, of course you're going to love it. And there's actually far more thought and care goes into people making decisions about gender affirming care. I mean, and I say this not to object to the idea of people having children, because I'm someone who has chosen to have children and is happy with that decision, but to point out this discrepancy that really it's, I think some people convince themselves that it's really about the risk of regret, but this, oh no, what if this person regrets it, only seems to show up when it's choices that the person disagrees with.
I mean, of two things. One thing is, as far as I know, the regret rate is higher for getting children than having abortion. So I mean, so that's so. But there are argument there. And also the thing is, I mean, there's a long and strenuous process before getting any kind of treatment as a transgender person, because everybody who had ever had any say in that had considered it an unnatural thing to want to do. So the idea that you just go into a doctor, I mean, you can get pregnant by going down to the local bar and get drunk and put together with the wrong person, right? I mean, let's not pretend that history hasn't been full of unwanted pregnancies that people have taken. I mean, I don't think you can find anybody that just go down and get by a like, it's not a tattoo that you get while you're drunk. It's a long process you have to go through, and there's a lot of doctors, and the whole idea that I just hate the whole idea that this is some kind of impulse, some kind of fad among young people. I mean, first of all, teenagers can't get it. There's not, or if we can, it's been after like a decade of treatment. It's so crazy.
They won't even let you get a tattoo if you're intoxicated.
Well, that's also the law in Denmark, but so far everybody I know who got the first tattoo usually was intoxicated. So I think there's some kind of evaluation criteria that's that's a little bit lacking.
Well, and it's
yeah.
important to point out as well too, they're kind of hypocritical about this, because a lot of the care that we actually give to transgender people was pioneered in cisgender people to deal with various other things, such as perimenopause, that sort of thing. There's a rather. Pardon, what was that, sir?
Sorry, I was just going to agree with you that it's a really good point. Hormonal blockers to delay puberty were developed for children going through premature puberty, and they've been used for, goodness, it must be decades now. And all this stuff about, oh no, they have such terrible side effects, we cannot possibly use them in children, has somehow only become an issue around the time they started being used for transgender care.
It's straight up hypocritical. Stuff that which is a-okay to do to cisgender people suddenly becomes nasty. Suddenly becomes such a big concern when it happens to transgender people. Like, it's illuminating that a lot of these things which actually sort of ban gender affirming care on minors have a loophole which state that in the case a child is born intersex and all that, it can go forward. Like, the whole point you're sort of saying that this is bad to do against kids is kids can't properly consent to that. So why then are you fine with applying these same surgeries and all that to infants, which in no way, shape, or universe could ever possibly consent? It's not that it's not that consent is the true thing here. It's just they hate trans people. That's it.
And of course, on the same lines, the US is a country where routine infant circumcision was massively common I gather rather less so than it used to be, but still very common and used to be basically considered the norm and the default. I remember with my first pregnancy as a pregnant woman in the UK, hanging around on news groups for pregnant women and parents that were largely composed of US people, and the kind of debates went on that the people who just sort of took it for granted that circumcision was the right thing to do, and the people pointing out, actually, hang on, you're doing something to children's genitals and their newborns, and maybe it is worth at least thinking about whether they're likely to regret this or not. And yet you've got this coexisting with the idea that children can't possibly make decisions about genital surgery if they're transgender.
Yeah, my goodness.
Yeah, and I think this whole thing kind of reminds me of the gay agenda argument back in the 80s and 90s, where I guess a lot of transphobia just seems like a remix of homophobia. But the argument back then was that gays were recruiting, trying to recruit children to become gay, and that's how they're going to grow. And so I think for some people it's not so much concern about children or or regret or surgeries. It's just remixing a homophobic argument now that to kind of get back to get kind of chip away at gay rights.
There are direct parallels to that. Like this whole modern discourse on grooming and all that, it was done decades ago against gay people. This was their main line of attack, is saying that gay people were groomers, that they're, trying to get kids in. There is nothing new to these arguments. It's the same old bullshit pulled forward, and that's just because it works. People shut down their brains and all that when confronted with, an emotional, what do you think about the children kind of thing. So it's a great way to get them to stop paying attention to any sort of intellectual arguments and just fall in line on your side, to join in on the demonization. And I mean, it'd be one thing if again this is sort of confined to some weird, religious right, kooks or anything like that. To see it sort of come in within the atheist-skeptic sphere has been just ridiculously alarming to me. Like, you people can't see the religious connection to this somehow. Like, I mean, back in the day, what really sort of helped accelerate my push away from mainstream atheism skepticism was a friend who was actually sharing videos from PragerU and saying, "Oh wow, there's some really good insight here." And I'm like, this is a fundamentalist, Christian thing. Why exactly are you, an anti-theist, sharing, religious propaganda? I mean, which becomes even more, apparent now that Florida is actually using PragerU videos for school. Yay! But even on top of,
I mean, but you also see with the feminists, why the hell are they on the same, like using the fundamental Christian? Because I mean, is the one thing the fundamental Christians are not is feminists. some of the atheists are not particularly feminist. I mean, we have David Silverman, the former head of American Atheists, who's now a right-wing cook, trying to push a right-wing agenda. He's firmly anti-feminist, but he's also firmly transphobic, and somehow he's an ally with a lot of feminists about anti-trans issues. Like, what the hell?
It's that house slave mentality I was talking about. It's like if you was like let's say they can kind of understand where radical feminists are coming from on one level, which is just like the pervasive the absolute pervasiveness of patriarchy, the way it's completely invisible to mainstream culture, like really give people that are partisans or paying attention stuff, people that are woke about it, like a feeling of hopelessness, of despair, that like, oh well, to be born with like this genital configuration is to be like, oppressed in this like overpowering way, and they get this like to see anybody saying like, well, I don't care what genital configuration I was born with, I'm going to try to exist in a different way. They're like, no, you can't get out of the prison, you have to stay in the same prison that we're all in, come on. It's yeah, the rights that the trans people are advocating for would benefit any cis person that was even a tiny bit gender nonconforming. You want to be like your Annie Lennox or Prince or Bret Michaels, you're not you're not allowed in the world that like forces everybody to be exactly this or that for gender. But they're like, yeah, the idea that somebody could try to be more free than what they've allowed themselves to be mentally, too much, can't handle it.
And they was just bring up, I mean, like the whole concept of men, like they also try to kind of hold themselves women to assault women. It's like that's. I'm not saying it didn't happen that some person dressed up as a woman to assault a woman, but that's not a trans person. That's a completely different type of person. That's a predator.
Hell, there even could be like some trans women that did like predatory or bad, nasty stuff at some point in time, but it doesn't justify like tarring the entire group. Just because trans people are such a statistically insignificant part of the population, I think you could it's really safe to say that more women have been raped, assaulted, murdered, or whatever by women than by trans women, by cis women than by trans women, just because there are so many more cis women than trans women. So it's like, who do we want to like base all of our decisions on, like, some little outliers that we were able to dig up to support our prejudices?
There's also the question of how exactly are things like the bathroom ban supposed to protect anyone anyway, when you don't have to give any proof of your gender to go into a public bathroom. You don't have to show paperwork. You sure as hell don't have to show what your genital configuration is. And let's face it, if you had to, if someone brought in a law saying that you had to do these things, everyone would absolutely hate the results. And I think the other thing is, I always feel in the oh no, trans people can't use trans women can't use female bathrooms debates. There always seems to be this huge, not quite stated subtext of, oh, but if someone has a penis, you cannot trust them not to rape people. And I feel like if I were to say I'm a feminist and as such I believe that everyone with a penis is potentially a rapist, then people would be all like, oh my god, stereotypical feminist, what an awful thing to say, you can't say that about men. But because people are all talking round that in the bathroom debates, then somehow in that context, working from that premise is considered acceptable.
I
And
mean, I pointed. Oh, sorry. Go ahead,
oh,
guys.
in the United States, where bathroom laws have been like most pushed, and policies have been pushed the hardest, like again and again, just because statistically speaking, there's more of them. It's cis women that have been like faced you know conflicts with other people and with the police, and getting
it's actually led to, I've read that statistically it's led to an increase in attacks on cis women, because women don't always look like stereotypical ideas of femininity. And so if you happen to be a cis woman who's either a trans woman or a cis woman who's happens to be quite flat chested or have quite short hair or happens to prefer dressing in trousers, and you look potentially not obviously like someone's idea of what a woman should look like. I mean, there are actual documented cases of people getting assaulted for these reasons, women getting assaulted for these reasons, because they're thought to be trans women trying to use a bathroom, and assumptions are made, and it's cis women who end up getting, and trans women in enormous numbers, and I do not at all mean to discount that, but even from the point of view of, oh my goodness, cis women must be protected, it's a dismal failure. It's absolutely backfiring.
And also, as we've seen in the sports context, there's a racial thing as well. I mean, black women are usually attacked more for being too masculine and stuff.
Yeah, transgender men, like if they are even doing what the transphobes would prefer them to do, I mean, aside from stopping existing and going into the women's room, then they catch shit as well. And of course, like any woman that looks at all masculine or gender nonconforming, like lesbians and stuff, butch lesbians and stuff like that. I mean, I had a cisgender teacher in high school that, I mean, people could really be forgiven for thinking that she might be trans. She literally had an Adam's apple. But I know she was cisgender because she got pregnant. She was like completely flat chested, had an Adam's apple, but she got pregnant while I was at attending that school. So I'm like, yeah, the cisgender woman by a body not expressing that in the same way as it would for someone else.
Well, and sports in general is fascinating as well, because there's just so much inherent misogyny to the transphobic point of view. I've pointed out multiple times that, and oftentimes to sort of justify the rhetoric and all that, they assume that women are inferior to men. These are, so-called feminists who nonetheless say that, it's the whole premise essentially is that if a man ever entered, a women's sport, it would absolutely destroy it. When no, that's not how it works. Performance is much more varied than that. It's much, broader than that. And I mean, who cares if transgender athletes are better than cisgender athletes? Seriously, who cares? I have made this argument on my blog. The point is essentially, if you believe trans women are women and trans men are men, then any inherent advantage they got to being born that way is just too bad, so sad. That's fine. We don't, rule out, say, Michael Phelps from being able to swim because his body has an inherent advantage, because of its ability to sort of deal with fatigue and, long muscles and all that. No, we just sort of say, well, he was born lucky with the genetic lottery. So why isn't the same rule applied to transgender people? It should be the exact same reasoning. And yet all too often we're sort of left to sort of parse the fine details of whether or not transgender people have an advantage or not, as if that's somehow relevant to the question at hand.
I
It's just
think
maddening.
a lot of the problem is, of course, that you get all the people not believing that trans women are women, trans men are men. And I think there's one fundamental difference that comes down to is people not taking gender identity seriously as a concept, because in this society there is a huge issue with not taking things that go on in the brain and that we have not yet learned to measure seriously as concepts. And I mean, you see it in the way that mental health issues are not taken seriously. You see it in the way that people are gaslit out of their feelings. And I think it's because imagination stems from the brain, there's this basic logic error that people think that everything else that stems from the brain must be imaginary, therefore gender identity is imaginary. And when you start asking people things like, well, do you believe that love's real or imaginary? Do you believe that the fact that you like such and such is real or imaginary? Do you believe that fears are real or imaginary? The things that come from the brain are also real. Even if we can't demonstrate them in the same way, but it's, I think, all part of this fact that this is not that brain type issues are not taken seriously, that gender identity is not taken seriously.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, I'm not too much into those studies that talk about differences in male and female brains. I think they're oversimplified often. But there has been some studies that show that the patterns we see in male brains are true for transgender people, and the female brains are true for transgender people for the true gender rather than the birth gender as well, that they've seen it. I mean, I always find it. I always find it problematic as a mentioned. Why do we have to argue with this? This should be relevant. I mean, but now, I mean, the so-called rational atheist or scientific based people. Well, here there are studies that show these things. Then why don't you actually accept those studies and just accept that that gender identity is not a trivial thing? It's actually something that affects people their whole life, and stop the damn I identify as an attack helicopter, whatever bullshit jokes you find funny this time, and neglect the whole concept. I mean, I'm as far from being transgender in many ways. I'm a middle-aged, cisgendered white male living in a well-to-do country where we don't actually have to worry about healthcare and stuff like that. I don't understand why people can't just be accepting of other people and try to accept what they actually identify with them. They tell the truth in their own way. I mean, I'm not going to go into this, and then people come, oh yeah, but then you can also identify as black. No, because there are inherent differences in how you're treated by society your whole life. So.
Transphobia. Right.
Yeah.
I was going to say about that. You're talking about, earlier in the conversation, so maybe we're talking about the idea that like there's this social contagion element of it, like everybody's getting like all the kids are like finding out about it and then going like, oh, I'm going to be trans too, it's great. Like it's not contagion, it's like communication, and so that's what they really want to stop, is to like it's like if a person finds out that it's possible to be transgender, they might identify that with their own experience and go like, wait a minute, I might be transgender. And it's like they really, really, really want nobody to find out that it's even possible in the first place. They want to figure out how to like stuff that genie all the way back in the bottle because they're disgusted by trans people because they're small-minded, crappy little bastards. So you know, it's a
I can I
world.
tell me interesting. I mean, I think in Ireland a it's a few years. I mean, within a decade ago, there was this debate of same-sex marriage. It was a huge thing in Ireland, obviously, because it came from a deeply Catholic place and moved to a very progressive place in very short time. One of the newscasters in Ireland was a conservative woman who was strongly against this, obviously against the whole same-sex marriage. During the whole debate, because she heard the arguments, she heard people talk about what they experienced, she actually came to realize that she was a repressed lesbian.
Excellent.
Yeah, it was. I mean, and the thing was, I saw an interview after because obviously I followed the debate back then. It was a fairly large thing because she stepped out of the whole news room, so she was not. She kind of became invisible for a while, and she turned out to be her life was so much better after she realized what. But she been through a strict Catholic upbringing where there was no room for being a lesbian. And it was only when people start talking about what it meant to be a lesbian for them that she realized it wasn't a stereotype with whatever she thought. It was she was actually one as well. And that's that's the same kind of thing. I think as a great American citizen said, this is the same thing other people also experience when they hear transgender young people, especially, but also older people for that matter, talk about how to feel and how to experience themselves, that they realize, hey, maybe this is what my issues are, and I can only wish for them to have a kind of the same happy ending as this woman, as far as I know, experienced, which was she accepted herself and she became a much better person, much more happy person from that.
Yeah, that's a consistent thing I've heard. Even transgender people who don't experience gender dysphoria will often talk about sort of a gender euphoria they experience from being that. It's not necessarily that it's painful or anything to sort of live in their existence, but when they actually try out, going with a different gender, they feel so much more better than what they had before. It's one thing to sort of, combat on that. It's not necessarily that people, transgender people are miserable per se because, they're in the wrong body or their body parts don't match up or anything like that. A lot of that misery actually is just due to transphobia and people spreading misinformation and hate against trans people. The actual experience of living in your body day to day you know, uh, isn't necessarily a great harm to transgender people.
I got a uh I feel like I got something I could talk about, but that may take a few minutes here.
Yeah, go ahead. We've got a few minutes.
Take the floor.
Okay, so yeah, there's this in the United States, there's this the dichotomy is between urban states and rural states or whatever, like progressive and regressive states. It's between urban centers and rural areas. So even in a state like California, there's you get outside of the major cities and things get a lot more conservative and dicey. So there's in our country there's this like sort of the gay and then subsequently trans meccas, centers where people would like go to feel like they could potentially escape to if they were trans and in a suburban or rural area where they didn't have that respect. And it doesn't, I mean, it doesn't work out that well. So I'm like about so yeah, I'm 20, 30 miles south of Seattle. which is one of the big one of those places, those meccas for like that are supposedly big bastions of acceptance. And I was working for a while at a Walmart, and there was a lot of transgender people here. There was among the homeless people out in the living out in the parking lot, including prostitutes and drug users and thieves of various kinds. There was a few trans women in there. Some of those folks is like, why are they homeless in the first place? They get rejected by their family. What happened there? Youth or homeless people are statistically a lot more likely to be LGBT. Pretty obvious reasons you can guess for that. But among the people that were working at the Walmart, there's a few transgender people on staff there. There was one trans woman that was working on the night shift as I think in stock or freight or something like that, and she seemed to be doing all right. I think I never noticed her to have any particular distress at the times that we saw each other, however briefly, ships in the night. But there was another trans woman there that had a very different experience of life, which is like basically every kind of transphobia that you could imagine, like coming at her one way or another. There's like some kind of like shitty religious dude out front, like collecting signatures for a bathroom bill. There's like co-workers in different departments, and she bounced around between different departments because like she'd run into problems one place than another. Everywhere she goes, she get into fights with people, or like have people like being crappy to her and stuff like that. I like hear people talking about her behind her back in the break room and stuff like this. It's the context in which I'm like, at that point, I still don't dress like this in public. This is a huge difference between. Anyway, it's just like, I felt really bad about for her because like she came from some rural state like Arkansas or Missouri or something like that, and came to this wonderful LGBT mecca, and then transitioned while she was working there, and then was just immediately had a continuing shitty time. I think she left behind a wife and kids back in the rural state in question, and trying to reconcile with her family. Wasn't trying to snoop or anything, but I'd occasionally overhear her on the phone. She would like, be switching to male voice, talking about like moving back there eventually, like again, like dead naming herself on the phone to like whoever was gonna, apartment she's gonna try to rent. It's just like this is life for people no matter where they live. It's like the world is not accepting yet, and the fact that the suicide rates go down for trans women, trans people that transition is almost remarkable to me, considering how unaccepting and how shitty the world is right now in so many ways for so many people. I know, like, I'm not going to be doing this in public anytime soon. Like even this close to Seattle, I have to take a bus to work once a week, right? If I did this on the bus, I guarantee I would be sexually harassed and or physically assaulted at some point. It's not a matter of if, it would definitely happen. It'd just be a matter of time, and it might not be all that long, So I I just it's still remarkable to me that like that is possible for people that transition to experience like some kind of positive benefit for it, because like so many people in the world have decided to make it so difficult for them in every other way possible. What else I want to say about that? I just there's this idea of like, you go, oh, what if I accidentally got drunk and decided to transition or whatever? And I saw a post recently, somebody was joking around because there's this anime called Ranma 1/2 or something like that, where if a character gets water spilled on him, he becomes a woman, and it's wacky hijinks ensue. And they're like, oh, they should do a version of Ranma where whenever this guy gets water spilled on him, he has to like get 2 psychologists to sign off on okaying him to go through like, you know, years of medical and procedures and counseling and facing all this kind of prejudice and stuff like that. It's like wacky hijinks. Yep, it ain't easy. I guess that's that.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'll let you complete your thought, Leslie.
I think we have to just keep hanging in there and keep on working for things to get better. And I know that's pretty hollow when people like you are going through the kinds of things that you're having to be put through. But I also think when I look at how things have changed for gay people over the time I've been alive, it gives me hope that people can change and societies can change, and that's what we've got to keep working towards.
I also think it's important. I mean, change happens because we fight for them, and I think, especially in the US, but also elsewhere, it's also very, very important to support the politicians who might not be perfect in any way, but at least they're not actively trying to kill trans people or even gay people and women. But I think that's the thing. And also I think it's important, that is also one of the reasons why we actually have this subject here. It's important to show which side of the fence we fall off. There's no fence. You shouldn't be offended in this. If you don't wholeheartedly support trans rights, then you are supporting bigot. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to try to pretend that there's some kind of neutral way of putting it. If you don't actually try to help trans people and accept trans people, then you're helping the bigots win.
Yeah, true. And I mean, I actually do go out in public in this shirt. You know, it's not something I commonly do and all that. But that's all very much because, I mean, I look cisgender. I'm obviously that way. You know, if someone wants to start something, I mean, come at me, bro, fine. But the point is it actually opens up the space and, you know, it sort of signals that, hey, transgender people are accepted here, even by people who you wouldn't necessarily expect. But also I mean, it's a way to show solidarity, it's a way to support, and it's a way to sort of just quietly drag things towards more acceptance. You know, it's a small action, but it's a very simple and easy to do action. And I think it's just an easy way to start if you're not sure exactly how you can contribute. Now, with me, it's a little bit disingenuous in that if someone actually did come up to me and say, "Oh, yeah, trans rights really are human rights," I could talk their hour off. I could talk their ear off for an hour with just, you know, apologetics on that. So I'm kind of lucky in that regard. But if you're not sure exactly how to help, small little displays of solidarity like this are a good way to start. You know.
And also, don't be afraid to be a killjoy if somebody makes funny jokes or bigoted jokes about it. To speak out. I mean, just say, "Oh, that's not cool," or "Haha." I mean, we all heard the "I want to identify as whatever stupid thing" so many times. We could just say, "Oh, how original! Don't you bigots have better, more fun jokes by now?" At least.
Well, and if you're worried about blowback and all that, just pretend like you don't understand the joke and force them to explain it. Once you get down deep enough, they'll actually sort of reach the bigoted core and all that. You know, it's a really good way to do it if you're sort of anxious about not, you know, confronting things. So I think
And
we're pretty.
read blog posts by trans people and learn more. That's another way to help.
Yeah, education definitely. Yeah, I've linked to quite a number of, you know, trans writers within my posts as well too. To name one, in fact, Julie Serrano is still quite active, and she has done some excellent posts, I think, over on Medium recently, collecting a lot of arguments, you know, in, you know, sort of pointing out flaws within a lot of this transphobic rhetoric. And she is, you know, an academic, cites all of her work, and has been doing this for decades. So she has a giant wealth of information. You know, she's literally like linking back to, you know, posts that she made in like, you know, like a decade ago, being like, "Oh yeah, well, I talked about this back then. Here's everything's old as new again. Here you go." So All right, I think we're sort of coming towards the end of this discussion as well, too. Was there anything anybody else wanted to sort of mention before we wrap up?
Well, I think just to tie back into atheism, I think there's our side, which is progressive and wants to change the system, but there's also another side of atheism that wants to become a part of the system and be accepted. So that's how I see the divide. And transphobia, we brush away the pseudoscientific arguments. That's really what it's about. They're saying, hey, we can be part of the system too.
Yeah, and if you're sort of, divided on that, like, oh, maybe I shouldn't or not, the other side's argument is based on lies. I'm deadly serious about this. Richard Dawkins' post, the one that sort of spawned the blog post and all, and what I was going to use as an anchor for this discussion, lies about biology. Richard Dawkins is using his sort of reputation as a key biologist to lie and spread misinformation about biology. If that doesn't piss you off, well, yeah, stay on the other side of the rift. We don't want you, quite frankly. Yeah. All right, I think we're at our natural sort of wrap right here. So I'll do a round of final words from everybody. Let's see. I will put. Actually, yeah, let's go with the Christian Wagner first, just to
Well, I
wrap up.
mean, I think I said it out, but yeah, don't stay silent, and also speak out and support. And if in doubt, if you don't know if your argument is sound, don't just accept the side of bigotry just because they seem like a good argument. I mean, you can always hear. I mean, when it's just an argument of bigotry.
Also, apologies for being crass, but also plug your blog too.
Yeah, I have a blog pro science. I'm not as active as I should be, but this is definitely a subject I'm going to write more about because we need to speak out. This is a fundamental issue right now. And it's not just in the US. It's kind of all over the world right now.
Indeed. All right, Sarah, give us your wrap up as well as how to find you as well too on socials.
Sorry, was that me? Sorry, for some reason there's a terrible line where you're coming from, so I couldn't hear if it was my name you said or not. Hi, right. I post as Geeky Humanist. I do actually have a Twitter handle as Geeky Humanist, but I haven't been posting anything there for a considerable while. And in terms of wrapping up, I think I've said pretty much what I was going to say. So I'll just say, let's all keep working on what should be the simple endeavour of treating other human beings with basic respect. And that would solve an awful lot of problems.
Nice. All right. Who wants to go next? Brinkman, I think you're doing okay. Do you want to show off your social media stuff? Plug the book that you've got. Actually, you've got multiple books at this point, I think. And I think you're also positioned to show off other things. Oh, you're muted, by the way.
I missed the button. I've got 3 books and I'm trying to get Augie in.
A bit of it. Oh, there we go.
Oh, there we go. Okay, yeah. William Brinkman. I write the Bolingbrook Babbler blog. My urban fantasy series is called the Bolingbrook Babbler Stories. And I'm also on TikTok under my name and also Bolingbrook Babbler. And wrap it up. I may not be perfect on this issue, but I'm certainly trying to learn, and I'd rather try to do better. And I think that's kind of the whole message of the entire city, my series, excuse me. Do better.
Mm-hmm. All right. Let's hand things over to Satan.
Yeah, there was an article recently that Abe at Oceanoxia posted about like we gotta like try to form alliance as much as possible, acknowledge that not everybody's gonna be a perfect ally, and so on. But it's like yeah, it's to what extent can you accept like ideological variance in the people that are on your side? I think that you gotta do it to some extent. You're not going to get everybody completely on the same page, but there are some issues on which if you got the more regressive position and you're trying to form like an alliance with somebody that's for progress, and you just don't see yourself being able to come around to the progressive side on it, just shut the fuck up about it. Like, if you're down at the Union Hall or whatever, or like trying to form a community garden or whatever, and you see some like gay people there, and you like hate gay people, just don't say anything. Just do the solidarity thing, and then like feel that way in private, maybe. Anyways, Great American Satan, freethoughtblogs.com/gas. I am not on social media because social media is a fucking nightmare, and that is about it.
Cool. Well, I actually am on social media. I'm on Mastodon, our mostly official, I would say pretty much official Mastodon instance, freethought.online. That's about all I've got social-wise. Blog, I do blog occasionally. If you kind of wondering, if you're a bit disappointed that we didn't go into detail on just what sort of bullshit Dawkins was peddling over there, I wrote a very long blog post which went into quite a detail, but it actually left out a number of arguments. Like, even while sort of looking over here, I'm finding new ways that Dawkins is literally lying about biology. It's by no means a complete reference to all the lies he tells within his thing, but it's a pretty good one to start off with. And I might even look into this blog series with Helen Joyce, which, yeah, that's going to be something. So, all right, I think with that we are good to go. So, if you want to learn more, we've given you a number of things to look up on our respective blogs. Other than that, though, make sure you do your part to fight transphobia, and we'll be seeing you next time around.